Hi, boys and girls. I hope you just finished listening to Jack and the Beanstalk. Remember to complete the graphic organizer with the story elements. Remember the title at the top. The author, you could just put folktale because this is a fictional folktale. And remember to include the characters, the setting, the beginning, the middle, and the end. Now we're going to read another book entitled Jack's Garden by Henry Cole. And then we're going to compare and contrast the differences between book number 1 and book number 2. Jack's Garden. This is the garden that Jack planted. And you can see a list of garden tools around the illustrations, like pruning shears, a hose, a watering can, and a trowel. This is the soil that made up the garden that Jack planted. You can see a list of things that live in the soil, like earthworms and beetle larvae and cicadas. These are the seeds that fell on the soil that made up the garden that Jack planted. So this story has seeds as well, not magic seeds, but different seeds like poppy seeds and milkweed seeds and hollyhock seeds. This is the rain that wet the seeds that fell on the soil that made up the garden that Jack planted. And here it has some information about different types of clouds, like cumulus clouds that bring the rain. These are the seedlings that sprouted with the rain that wet the seeds that fell on the soil that made up the garden that Jack planted. So you can see the seedlings here and the roots forming. We call that germination. These are the plants that grew from the seedlings that sprouted with the rain that wet the seeds that fell on the soil that made up the garden that Jack planted. So now we start to see the plants grow. These are the buds that formed on the plants that grew from the seedlings that sprouted with the rain that wet the seeds that fell on the soil that made up the garden that Jack planted. And there's a list of all the different types of buds that are growing, like there's a milkweed and buttercup. These are the flowers that blossomed from the buds that formed on the plants that grew from the seedlings that sprouted with the rain that wet the seeds that fell on the soil that made up the garden that Jack planted. Now we see the flowers start to form. Over here, some black-eyed Susans. These are the insects that sip nectar from the flowers that blossomed from the buds that formed on the plants that grew from the seedlings that sprouted with the rain that wet the seeds that fell on the soil that made up the garden that Jack planted. Now you start to see the butterflies and the bees and insects come to sip the nectar. These are the birds that chase the insects that sip nectar from the flowers that blossomed from the buds that formed on the plants that grew from the seedlings that sprouted with the rain that wet the seeds that fell on the soil that made up the garden that Jack planted. And this is the garden that Jack planted. And he looks pretty proud of that garden. At the end of this book, it says to start your own garden, find a spot where you may dig. Your mom or dad may need to help you get started. Choose a place that gets some sunshine and isn't too wet. Now, the seeds you may get will be very delicate, so handle them carefully. You shouldn't be planting deeply in the soil. Here's a good way to plant very tiny seeds like poppy seeds. Put some soil in a bowl or pan and gently mix the seeds in with it. Then scatter the seeded soil over the ground. After planting or scattering the seeds, water them gently. A good place to get more information on starting a garden is your local library. You can also research planting a garden online, and happy gardening. So this book gave a lot of different facts and information and lists of different seeds and different tools that you would use for gardening. Let's compare and contrast the two different stories. So we had Jack and the Beanstalk and Jack's Garden. When you begin your comparison chart here, your Venn diagram, you want to make sure that you add the titles to both books. So Jack and the Beanstalk would go here for book number 1. And then on book number 2, you could write Jack's Garden. Let's think about some things that were the same with both books and some things that were different. One thing that stands out right away to me are the characters of the story and that they had the same name. So maybe they both had Jack as the main character. This one we could have Jack and Beanstalk. And this story is Jack's Garden. Another thing that stood out to me that is different about both books is that one is fiction. We know that Jack and the Beanstalk is a fictional tale, like a fairy tale, and one is nonfiction. Were there any other things in the stories that stood out to you? There were seeds involved in both stories. There were supporting characters in Jack and the Beanstalk and not in Jack's Garden. There was facts and information in Jack's Garden and not any facts and information about growing plants in Jack and the Beanstalk. There was a beginning, a middle, and an end with Jack and the Beanstalk. And I would say with Jack's Garden, there was also a beginning, middle, and end. But they were both very different. Think about if there were any other similarities. Maybe they both had seeds. But this one talked about how the seeds form with different facts and information about growing your own garden. I definitely think that this story, Jack and the Beanstalk, talked about a fairy tale involving gold coins and a hen that laid a golden egg and a harp, a golden harp that sang songs. There was definitely a giant in this story. And there was a happy ending in both, I would say. So I'd like you to go through both books and both stories and write your own information that you've gathered from both the fiction and nonfiction text. All right, thank you so much. Have a great day and do your best and make sure that you post your finished graphic organizers to your Dojo portfolio. All right, thanks, bye.